So in this How I Studied, we're going to take a look at TryParse. At this point, we've been introduced to parse, which, if we recall, is a method that we use in order to convert a string into some kind of number. Because the computer most of the time will interpret things as strings, so when trying to do math with them, it'll always be as it'll try to concatenate unless we tell it specifically that is a number. So to use a parse, what we do is we take the type that we are trying to convert it to. So here we're going to do an int. As you see, I declared an int variable. I'm parsing it into an int. So int.parse. It takes some parentheses. And I'm going to do my console.readLine. So that way, if this works, and just to test it out really quick, I'm going to do user input plus user input. This is going to show us if we actually add the math together. So here I'm going to run it. I'm going to say 4. And here we see it prints out 8. That's because it's taking the user input and then adding it to itself. So it gives us 8. So that's worked out perfectly. But the problem with a parse is if we were to run it again and we give it something that is not a number, well then we get an exception. Here we see it's a runtime exception. Input string was not in the correct format. And then it shows us here it is a format exception. This is a very common exception, especially when you're asking for inputs from a user and they happen to put in the wrong input. Well, previously, the way that we dealt with this is using what were known as try-catch blocks. Those are created by doing the word try, and then doing a code block, and then the word catch right after it, and then a code block. And what happens there is, if we were to place our code that we are going to try to run, that has the risk of crashing, then we're going to have a catch that will catch any exceptions, such as this exception, if this fails to run properly. So to demonstrate if this is working, we're going to do a new console write line. You need to enter a valid format. And if this works properly and we run it, so because I'm doing a try catch, and I'm using an online compiler, it already kind of threw this for us. Don't worry about that. I'm going to do some random letters, and we see here that it does indeed throw the you need to enter a valid format, the console write line I put here, instead of showing all that exception. This is the purpose of a try. It's to catch any exceptions, anything that we are not prepared for in the eventuality that something messes up. Well, this is all fine and good, but there are a lot of times when we expect a user to possibly enter in the wrong information. So, and we want to save our try catches for when it's something that's really, that's a larger error that we have to take care of. So that's why C# has a specific method called the TryParse. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to get rid of all this right now, and I'm going to introduce the TryParse. So this is a little bit more complex than our parse. It has a couple moving parts, but you'll see why it's so useful here in just a second. I'm going to start by declaring my number, and I'm just going to say int user number. And I'm just going to set it equal to 0. No other number. I'm just going to set it equal to 0 as like a default number. I'm just going to initialize it. Then I'm actually going to do a bool, and I'm going to say parse user number. So it's just the variable name. And here I'm going to do an int dot, but instead of doing a parse, I'm going to come down here to a try parse. And now I'm going to, on my first, this takes 2 different arguments. The first argument is going to be our console.readLine, which we already did beforehand. This is reading the user's input. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the keyword out. So this is important to remember. This is a unique keyword. It's out. And I'll explain what it's doing here in just a second. But then I'm going to pass in this name, this user number here. So I'm actually going to pass in that variable here. And before I explain everything that's happening, I'm going to show you what's going to go on here. I'm going to now do, instead of doing a try catch, I'm going to do an if statement. And I'm just going to put this parse user, put this in here. And because this is going to resolve to true or false, but just for readability in this instance, I'm going to say parse equals true. This is redundant, but just for ease of reading right now. Right, if true, then I'm going to do console.writeLine. And same as before, I'm going to do user number plus user number. So I am using this user number. Then I'm going to do an else down here. So in case this is false, what I'm going to say is console.writeLine. Please enter a valid number. There we go. Let's go ahead and run it. Let's go enter, put in a number. I'm going to put the number 6 in. Here it prints out 12. That is because this all turned out to be true. It parsed it. It ended up being a number. So then this was true, added the number to itself, and printed out 12. Now if I rerun this, throw in some letters, hit enter, please enter a valid number. So as we see, this is basically taking on the same responsibility as our try-catch, but without needing those try-catch blocks. What's happening here is this. So up to this point, it is just an int parse. It would throw an exception. But there's some additional code written behind the scenes that's going to try to check it. And it's basically saying, hey, if this is not a number, instead of returning and throwing an error and crashing your code or needing a try-catch, it returns a value. This is why this is looking at a bool. If this is true, if this is a number, it will return true, which allows us to now pass this in an if statement or any condition. It allows us to do some validation. Validations are some of the most important things you can do when writing all your code to prevent errors and other possible issues with your code. So here, if this number is true, then it returns true, which you can now pass into an if. Else, if it's false, it's not a number, then you can have it throw an else. So that's what's happening right here. This is the tricky part. So usually when you pass in something to a variable, or to a method, my apologies, only one thing can come out of it. Only one return type can come out of it. That's why this is only returning true or false. The thing is that we need to actually get the number that's coming out of it, right? Because we know this is actually converting it to a number. Well, that's where this out username comes in. What this out word means is whatever variable that we pass in, we're actually now going to put the number that is here into this number. So here, as you saw, we put 0, but now when we do the username, usernum, we'll be able to see right here, run this, it turns into 234. It outputs this number into this variable right here. So it is changing the 0 into whatever has been placed right here. It's essentially returning a second value, whereas an int parse, it would actually convert it and output the number right away. So int usernum2 equals int.parse. Here, when we do this, it converts the number and attaches it to the variable. Using this slightly more complex method, it will actually output the number here into whatever variable you're passing in there. So it is a tricky second step, but it is very useful because now again we're able to try true or false, and because we're able to parse it like that, we're able to validate a lot easier without needing try catches. And now if we check down here inside of our else, I'm going to do the same thing, this console writeLine. And we're going to run, and I'm going to pass in an invalid input. As we see here, that number continues to stay 0. So TryParses, honestly, I use TryParses all the time now. It's one of the most useful tools in our developer toolkit. It helps you really prepare for validations, because if I have something that I know I can check is coming from the user that may be false, I prefer to do it in an if-else statement over a try-catch. This is the preferred method over a try-catch. So, enjoy.